And the third person that will be speaking today is Angi Yoder-Maina. Angi is a PhD student in applied conflict transformation at the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies in Cambodia. And she's also the director of the Green Spring Network.
So as we get this started, I'll get going. Kumekucha. In Swahili, it means it's a new dawn. And it's something that we've been working on in Kenya, actually, for the last 10 years. But we have this kind of a program also in Somalia, and now in Ethiopia, and we hope again in South Sudan. So we're a very small-based organization that believes social healing is a key to doing all of this stuff that we want to do. Imagine this bottle is cracked. And imagine it's the community. And what do? We pour resources into this community. In each of your contexts, you pour resources into a cracked cup. What happens to the water when you pour in? It's wasted. Can you use it for what it's meant for? Probably not. And after a while, those who are pouring in the water stop seeing the community, and all they see is the wastage. So everybody spends all their time thinking about how do we get rid of the wastage? How do we work on that issue? And we forget about the issue of the cracked cup. And the cracks are actually so many different things. Think in your own context. What are the cracks in your context? There are so many. In our context, it might be ethnic violence that comes at election time. It might also mean domestic violence. It might also be the violent extremism that we keep facing actually in Kenya. There's so many different cracks, and it can also be corruption. Our cracks are, each of us have our own cracks. And so we work on the idea that the people who own the cracks own the solutions. Oops, I went too fast. And if you own the solutions, you own and you know what the problems are. So in Kenya and the other places that we've worked here, we've actually worked on adapting the cycle of violence in picture form. And we've adapted it to be really reflective of the society and the context at that time. And what we've done is, as we adapt what the cycle of violence is, the victim cycle, as well as the cycle of aggression, we ask people to define it. And then we put it into stories. And from there, we ask artists to paint both the definition and the stories. So right now in Kenya, we have about 350 paintings, watercolor paintings, that describe both the victim cycle, the aggressor cycle, but also, most importantly, how do we know how to traditionally, culturally break out of that cycle of violence? And we've done it now in images. So when we sit with the communities with the images, they actually tell stories based on very authentic looking stories, pictures. This is the framework that we use. And the most important part of this is we look at some of the issues around stress and trauma awareness, which is a biomedical thing. Whether I'm an American, a Kenyan, or from Myanmar, we have some ways that that we react to stress and trauma. But it's our context and our culture and our historical grievances that interpret that biology for each of us. Violence. As I'm a peace builder, and you're all studying or working on peace building or conflict or mediation. Violence is often a forgotten piece, the chronic violence. We do a lot of conflict analysis. We look at how does this group talk to this group? How can we get people into dialogue? But we've forgotten to look at how chronic violence impacts the individual and the systems and structures that are impacted by it. This is a quote from a Kenyan peace builder, and he wrote this last year in September, just after we had some more tension from our election violence. And I think this is the most important piece of the work that we do, that we're always looking that the violence that we exist in is just one more place for us to be able to create a new peace constituency. And so just as we have the aggressor cycle and the victim, we also believe, we work with former al-Shabaab doing this kind of work in Somalia, and they all have said to us, I had no choice. The militias will always say, I had no choice. Your right extremists in this country will say, I had no choice. Everyone says they had no choice to move from being a victim to being an aggressor. And what we say is the healing process is peeling open what choice is and starting people to see that that was a violent choice you made, but there are other non-violent. Even in limited choice situations, there's always a choice that can be made that does not involve violence. And I think that's an important part to look at as we're looking at this kind of programming. And so we expand choice. This is some of the biomedical piece. How many know that when, say a lion, I'm from Africa, a lion came in that door, what would you do? The chief, you might fight it. Yeah? Yeah, I would run. Somebody else might be frozen. And somebody else might freeze from it. This is natural. This happens from our hormones. And this is a little bit different, so I'll come back to the green line. This is where the yellow part of our brain, the emotional brain, tells us lions are dangerous, get out. Or lions are dangerous, hide. Lions are dangerous, just ignore it's there and it'll ignore you. And when you go into that part of your brain, this frontal lobe, this part of our brain where we pray, where we negotiate, where we forgive, it goes off because we need to do the survival piece. And so in order for us to thrive, we have to activate here. How many of the world religions have something that comes back and brings you to this point? Many of them, almost all of them. This is where we activate. And imagine now a country that is in constant survival zone, or a community who is constantly in survival zone. Can they activate and use all our great skills at negotiation and conflict transformation and all the things that we bring into them? Probably not. And so this is the biomedical piece that I talk about, that we all need to actually understand, and then understand how it's translated culturally and contextually. So the Kumekucha program works right now in Kenya. We've been at the coast of Kenya. Right now we're in Mombasa. We have 46 community volunteers. Our point is that if we can find people who are already the resilience point in their community, they are the people who will be there long term. They're not the experts who come in and go out like we heard this morning. They have to be there. And they're the ones that we knock on their door. We call them the Mama Anisas. The Mama Anisas are in every community. And how do we tap into these people and the wealth of tradition that they bring in being able to solve the issues? Every one of our participants, so they lead small groups for 12 weeks, between 12 and 15 people each week of the same people, for 2 hours a week, a small little group, and everybody has 2 hours. Even the women who normally can't come to a workshop for 5 days, they can find time to sit with their friends for 2 hours and develop this kind of a program. What we find is even after the program ends, people actually continue to meet, because it's a space, it's almost like a brave space. It's a space that they've been able to create. This is the material, this is the artwork. It's all storytelling based. We don't ask anybody to make anything up. It just comes out. And this story, if you looked at this, I bet everybody in this room would have a different story to tell. And yet, it's all come from different real stories that are here in Kenya. The facilitators, these are our rock stars. They're really volunteers. And if you've worked in East Africa, you'll say, there's no such thing as volunteer. They have to have this per diem and that per diem and da-da-da-da-da. Actually, they're really volunteers. They get a mobile phone, and that's it, because that's how they watch the program go. But we've been really keen to make sure that people are owning their own healing agenda and that people are really volunteers. These are the circles. They spend, like I said, 2 hours a week in their programs. When you've been hurt by violence, your creativity is gone. You can't imagine anything new. And what we find is the intractable starts to become possible. When this starts to be activated, people start to say, hey, I want to be involved in this. Hey, I can do this. And that's something that I think is what this work is really about. I'm going to skip this. You can go onto our website and see it. So I just want to do some really quick things. We do an evidence-based piece. We're doing before and after surveys. We have IRBs with the work that we're doing. We're trying to make this something that we can publish, and we can talk about the link between what violence does to communities to make them afraid and fearful, and what healing does to do the opposite. We know that there's a relationship between trauma and violence now. There's a behavior in how people can become more resilient with healing. And we also know that there is levels, because of doing this work, there's changes in distress symptoms. And we're using different scales, and we were using PTSD scales. We realized they were very culturally biased, and we've now moved to more distress scales. People who have high levels of trauma are less likely to be positive belief in their community. They are less interdependent with other ethnic groups. They're less willing to reconcile with former enemies, and they have more pessimistic attitudes to justice and peace. And they're less likely to report the satisfaction that perpetrators, that the offenders can come back home and live in the community. But what we are finding is that social cohesion is increasing, forgiveness and reconciliation is better, and that there's a whole new area of information that people know about how trauma works and stress reduces. I have a lot of studies. You can go on our website and see what they are. This is just showing this one is very interesting because it shows that after they've gone through the 12 weeks, they're much more likely to interact with their groups. They're more interested in accepting perpetrators back into the community. And these are some of the findings that you'll have. So this is how we do the monitoring of the groups. And that is that presentation. Thank you. This is some of the materials that we use.